Two armies face each other across Europe's central river. Romance-speaking troops on one side, Germanic-speaking troops on the other. Leaders meet. Borders are drawn. Promises of peace are made. This sounds like a modern European crisis, but it isn't. This happened in 843. According to medieval chronicles and later historical records, after Charlemagne's empire collapsed, his grandsons divided the land into three parts: West Francia for the Romance peoples, East Francia for the Germanic peoples, and Lotharingia in between. This is not a 20th century war. This is how one treaty, the Treaty of Verdun, created the borders that would become France and Germany, and quietly planted a rivalry that lasted for centuries. Charlemagne wasn't just a king. He ruled the largest political entity in Western Europe since the fall of Rome. His empire stretched from the Atlantic Ocean in the west to the Elbe River in the east, and from the North Sea down into northern Italy. At its heart were cities you still know today: Paris in the west, Aachen in the center, Strasbourg along the Rhine, and Pavia in northern Italy. These cities weren't just places on a map. They were administrative centers, military hubs, and crossroads of trade and culture. Charlemagne became king of the Franks in 768. Through decades of campaigns and alliances, he expanded his kingdom into a vast empire, covering much of modern France, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Western Germany, and northern Italy. His empire spanned multiple languages and cultures. In the West, people spoke early Romance languages. In the East, Germanic dialects dominated. In the South, Latin and Italian traditions mixed. In the North, Saxons and Frisians maintained their independence. To govern this vast and diverse realm, Charlemagne relied on counts and dukes to manage provinces, and sent royal envoys called missi dominici to enforce imperial law. He established Aachen as his political and cultural capital. Einhard, Charlemagne's contemporary biographer, recorded, "He was a ruler such that, as long as he lived, no one dared oppose him." This shows that his authority depended heavily on his personal presence and reputation. Beyond his borders, rivals challenged him constantly. The Saxons resisted in the east, requiring decades of campaigns. In northern Italy, the Lombards controlled cities like Milan and Pavia, which Charlemagne conquered to secure strategic territory. Even the Mediterranean world, Byzantines, Saracens, and trade networks, influenced politics and conflict. Charlemagne also tried to unify his empire culturally. The Carolingian Renaissance promoted literacy, standardized Latin, and established cathedral schools across the empire. Scriptoria copied texts, spreading knowledge to local elites. Yet, despite these efforts, regional loyalties, legal traditions, and languages remained strong. The empire was powerful, but structurally fragile. Einhard explained why he wrote about Charlemagne. "I judged it better to hand over these things to the memory of posterity than to suffer that the most illustrious life be banished to darkness." By the time Charlemagne died in 814, he had created a multi-ethnic empire centered on key cities and fortified frontiers. But without a clear succession system or unified identity, one question loomed: who would inherit this empire, or break it apart? That question would soon lead to civil wars, disputes among Charlemagne's grandsons, and ultimately the Treaty of Verdun, an agreement that would redraw the map of Europe forever. After Charlemagne died in 814, his empire passed to his only surviving legitimate son, Louis the Pious. Louis inherited a realm of extraordinary scale, stretching from the Atlantic Ocean in the west to the Elbe River in the east, and from the North Sea down into northern Italy. It was a land of multiple languages, cultures, and traditions, and governing it would test even the strongest ruler. Louis ruled from Aachen, the imperial capital, but much of the empire was administered by powerful local counts and dukes. They controlled cities, fortresses, and armies, and their loyalty could shift depending on who appeared strongest. The eastern border along the Saxons was still militarized, while northern frontiers near the Frisians required constant vigilance. In the south, the Lombard cities of Pavia and Milan were strategic for control over Italy and trade. The empire's size meant that orders from Aachen took weeks to reach some regions, giving local rulers autonomy and sometimes creating conflicts of interest. Louis's main internal challenge was his succession plans. He had 3 sons initially: Lothair, the eldest, Pepin, who controlled the kingdom of Aquitaine in the southwest, and Louis the German, who managed Bavaria and the eastern territories. Later, Charles the Bald was added after Louis restructured inheritances to balance claims. This created tension. Each son controlled a distinct region with its own cities, resources, and armies. Lothair, as the eldest, claimed authority over the imperial center and sought to control Aachen, Reims, and Metz. Pepin held Aquitaine, including key cities like Toulouse and Bordeaux, wealthy centers of trade and culture. Louis the German ruled Bavaria, centered on Regensburg and Ingolstadt, with loyal nobles who resented interference from Aachen. Charles the Bald, added later, gained lands in the west, including parts of Neustria and Orléans, upsetting the balance among his brothers. The empire soon fractured along these regional lines. By 830, factions of the nobility openly rebelled. Battles erupted across the empire. Forces loyal to Lothair marched from Aachen to challenge control over Reims. Pepin's troops fortified Aquitaine and resisted interference from the central court. Louis the German consolidated forces along the Danube and Rhine, controlling crossings and fortresses to block eastern invasions. Charles the Bald's forces secured northern and western cities, creating multiple theaters of conflict simultaneously. The fighting was not continuous, but consisted of sieges, raids, and political maneuvering. Control of fortified cities and river crossings often mattered more than open battle. For example, armies clashed near Strasbourg, Metz, and Orléans, while key supply routes along the Rhine and Seine determined which side could sustain campaigns. Noble allegiances shifted constantly, sometimes supporting one son in one city, then another in the next. The church also played a major role. Bishops and abbots could raise armies, collect taxes, and sway the population. Some supported Lothair, hoping to preserve imperial authority in central regions. Others backed Louis the German in the east, or Charles the Bald in the west, leveraging their spiritual influence to gain political advantage. Contemporary records from the Annales Regni Francorum describe the chaos. The sons of Louis the Pious, in their ambition, brought the realm to near ruin. Each held cities and regions under his command, and the people suffered from the continual feuds of their rulers. The civil wars dragged on for more than a decade. Some battles were decisive, others inconclusive, creating a cycle of temporary truces and renewed fighting. Cities like Metz, Reims, Orléans, Strasbourg, and Regensburg were repeatedly contested, each representing not just strategic advantage but also symbolic authority over a region. By the late 830s, Louis tried to mediate between his sons. He issued charters granting lands, privileges, and titles to pacify claims, but these concessions often inflamed rivalries further. No matter the negotiations, each son maintained armies, fortified cities, and a network of loyal nobles. The empire, though intact in name, was effectively fragmented into competing regional powers, each ruled by one of Louis's sons. Every city, river, and fortress became a chess piece in a political and military struggle that would determine the shape of Europe for generations. If you enjoyed this video, Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Hit the like button to show your support and turn on notifications so you never miss a deep dive into history. Your support helps us bring more accurate, fascinating stories straight to you every week. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Hit the like button to show your support and turn on notifications so you never miss a deep dive into history. Your support helps us bring more accurate, fascinating stories straight to you every week. By the late 830s, Louis the Pious's empire was a fractured mosaic of ambition, loyalty, and rebellion. Tensions between his sons were no longer abstract. They erupted into open military campaigns, town by town, river by river. The first major turning point came in 833, at what later chroniclers called the Field of Lies, near Colmar in Alsace. Here, Louis faced his eldest son, Lothaire, who had allied with Pepin of Aquitaine and Louis the German. The emperor's army, composed of regional levies and loyal counts, was undermined by betrayal. Many commanders abandoned Louis in the middle of the campaign, and his troops melted away. The Annales Regni Francorum records, "The emperor was left almost alone, his banners deserted, his army scattered. The realm was confounded by the ambition of his sons." Humiliated, Louis was forced to submit to Lothaire, temporarily losing both authority and control over key cities like Aachen and Metz. The church itself, with figures such as Ebbo of Rhin, played a decisive role in legitimizing Lothaire's temporary victory. Yet the political tides shifted quickly. By 834, Louis had been restored. Alliances fractured. Louis the German and Charles the Bald began to resist Lothaire's dominance, seeking to carve out their own spheres of control. This led to a series of campaigns along the Rhine and in eastern Bavaria, where control of river crossings and fortified towns dictated who could move troops and supplies. Meanwhile, in the southwest, Pepin of Aquitaine faced growing unrest. Local nobles and his nephew, Pepin II, refused to accept centralized oversight. Sieges were laid to Toulouse and Bordeaux, where city walls and river access made direct assault costly. Louis the Pious himself had to intervene, leading troops into Aquitaine to reassert imperial authority. Contemporary chronicles emphasize the human cost. Civilians fled the countryside, trade halted, and cities endured shortages. By 842, the conflict reached another decisive moment, the Oaths of Strasbourg. Charles the Bald and Louis the German, uneasy allies against Lothaire, swore mutual support in front of their troops. Remarkably, the oaths were made in vernacular languages. Louis the German's troops heard Old High German, Charles's soldiers heard Romance, so each army could understand its commander's vow. This was not just a political maneuver. It was a public demonstration of loyalty and military coordination, a rare moment of clear alliance in a decade of chaos. The chronicler Nithard, who witnessed these events, wrote, "They bound themselves in truth before the assembled soldiers, speaking in the languages of their peoples, that all might know the pact of brothers against the eldest." These oaths set the stage for the Battle of Fontenoy in 841, one of the bloodiest clashes of the period. Lothaire's forces marched to assert dominance over central lands, meeting Charles and Louis's allied army near Fontenoy-sur-Creuse. The fight was intense. Cavalry charges, fortified positions, and river crossings played critical roles. Reports indicate that thousands of men were killed, including nobles on both sides. The Annales Bertiniani, written shortly after, describes the carnage. The field was strewn with bodies of the great and the humble alike. The sons of the emperor fought as if the empire itself depended upon their victory, and many towns were left undefended in their wake. Despite Lothaire surviving, his position was weakened. The battlefield losses, combined with the oaths of Strasbourg, forced him into a defensive posture. Cities in the west and east increasingly pledged allegiance to Charles or Louis the German, further fracturing imperial authority. After Fontenoy, the Civil War entered a phase of regional consolidation and attrition. Fortresses and river crossings became the prize, and sieges were common. Reims, Metz, and Strasbourg saw multiple transfers of control, depending on which son could muster local noble support. The Church remained influential, blessing armies, negotiating truces, or excommunicating those who acted against papal interests. After years of civil war, by 843, the empire of Louis the Pious's sons was exhausted. The battles, sieges, and shifting alliances had carved out de facto territories, even if no formal agreement existed. The people, the cities, and even the nobility were weary, and the constant campaigning had weakened central authority. Lothair I, the eldest, still claimed imperial supremacy and the central corridor of the empire, Aachen, Metz, Reims, but his armies were depleted after Fontenoy and the repeated campaigns in the west and east. Charles the Bald solidified control over western lands, including Neustria, Orléans, and parts of modern-day France, with the support of western nobles. Louis the German held the eastern territories, anchored on Bavaria, Regensburg, and the Rhine, relying on eastern nobility who preferred regional autonomy. The Annale Regni Francorum notes, "The sons of Louis, wearied by their strife, held their lands firmly. Yet the unity of the empire was gone. Each ruled in his own right, yet feared neither peace nor war." The political reality was clear. The empire was effectively divided along natural and cultural lines. Rivers, mountains, and regional identities dictated the power each son held. The Rhine separated eastern and central forces. The Loire marked the western limits. The Vosges and Alps created defensible borders in the south. Cities that had once symbolized unity, Strasbourg, Metz, Reims, Orléans, were now points of negotiation, bargaining, and control rather than imperial centers. Diplomacy began to replace warfare. Negotiations took place in Meaux, Strasbourg, and along the Rhine, often mediated by bishops and influential abbots. Church leaders, exhausted by the devastation, pressed for a lasting resolution. Even Nithard, Lothair's own grandson and chronicler, emphasized that the empire could not survive another generation of fraternal conflict without permanent division. For the love of the realm and the safety of its people, the sons of Louis saw that the sword alone could not keep the empire whole. Before any treaty, minor skirmishes continued. Garrisons were repositioned, river crossings were fortified, fortresses were supplied. But both Charles and Louis the German realized that continued fighting could collapse trade, provoke noble rebellions, and risk external invasions from Vikings or Slavic tribes along the eastern borders. Lothair, weakened and isolated, accepted that compromise was inevitable. By early 843, envoys moved between the brothers, presenting maps of lands, rivers, and cities as bargaining tools. The negotiations were detailed. Each city, each river, even mountain passes were discussed. For example, Metz and Reims were recognized as centers of Lothair's domain, while Charles the Bald secured the western rivers and cities, and Louis the German claimed the eastern territories along the Rhine and Danube. Church officials verified boundaries and provided spiritual legitimacy to the agreements. It was clear to all involved that war had exhausted the realm. No army could hold an empire stretching from the Atlantic to the Elbe without cooperation, and no ruler could dominate without overextending. The brothers were preparing to turn decades of fighting into a formal, lasting settlement, setting the stage for what would be known as the Treaty of Verdun, a moment that would define the borders of modern Europe. By 843, after years of civil war and shifting alliances, the sons of Louis the Pious finally came together in Verdun, on the Meuse River, to formally divide the empire. The treaty was precise, naming cities, rivers, and regions. It created 3 kingdoms, each ruled by one son. Lothair I, the eldest, retained the imperial title and was granted the Middle Francia. The treaty text emphasizes, "Lothair, by the grace of God Emperor, shall hold the lands from the North Sea down through the Rhine and the Meuse, including the imperial city of Aachen, Metz, Reims, and the Lombard lands of Italy with the city of Pavia." Middle Francia stretched as a long corridor from the North Sea to northern Italy. It included parts of modern Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, eastern France, western Germany, Switzerland, and northern Italy. Lothair's realm was geographically vulnerable, long and narrow, but he retained the imperial title and control over the symbolic cities of power. Louis the German received the eastern portion, known as East Francia. The treaty specifies, "Louis shall rule all lands east of the Rhine, including Bavaria, the lands of the Alemanni, and the cities of Regensburg and Passau, extending to the Elbe." East Francia corresponded to much of modern Germany, Austria, and parts of eastern Switzerland. Louis controlled river routes and defensible territory, giving him a relatively cohesive and sustainable kingdom. Charles the Bald was granted the western portion, called West Francia. The treaty reads, "Charles shall hold the western lands, including Neustria, Aquitaine, Orléans, and the Loire Valley, extending to the Atlantic coast." West Francia formed the basis of modern France, stretching from the Atlantic to roughly the Loire River, including major cities like Orléans, Tours, and Nantes. The Treaty of Verdun was exceptionally detailed for its time. It did not simply divide an abstract realm. It listed cities, rivers, and strategic regions, ensuring that each brother knew his borders. Natural boundaries like the Rhine, Meuse, and Loire rivers, along with mountain ranges such as the Vosges and Alps, defined the territorial limits. By 843, the Treaty of Verdun officially divided the Carolingian Empire. But no original copy of the treaty has survived. Our understanding of what was agreed comes entirely from near-contemporary chronicles, letters, and later legal commentaries. One of the most important sources is the Annales Regni Francorum, the royal annals written by clerics close to the imperial court. These annals describe the conflict and the eventual division of lands among Louis the Pious's sons, noting the cities and regions each would control. They don't reproduce the treaty word for word, but they emphasize the principle of division and the symbolic authority of the sons. The Annales state, "The sons of Louis, weary of war, divided the realm with justice and reason, that peace might be restored to the people." Another key source is Nithard, a grandson of Charlemagne, who witnessed many of the events leading up to Verdun. In his Histories, he records the Odes of Strasbourg and describes how Lothair, Charles, and Louis the German negotiated control over cities, rivers, and fortresses. He emphasizes that the brothers recognized the necessity of compromise, writing that they bound themselves in truth before the assembled soldiers, that all might know the pact of brothers against the eldest. Later medieval historians, such as the Annales Bertiniani and commentaries by clerics like Hincmar of Reims, provide additional details about the territories, showing which rivers, mountain ranges, and cities were used as boundaries. From these records, historians reconstruct the allocation. Lothair taking the central corridor to northern Italy, Louis the German holding the east, and Charles the Bald ruling the west. Even though the exact treaty document is lost, these chronicles, letters, and ecclesiastical records give a clear picture of the intent, geography, and scope of the division. They reveal not only the political reality, but also the concerns of the time: defending borders, securing loyalty from nobles, and maintaining symbolic legitimacy over the empire's key cities. In short, Verdun is known not from parchment preserved in an archive, but from the careful observation of contemporary writers, men who lived through civil war, saw armies march through Aachen, Metz, and Orléans, and understood the stakes of dividing one of the greatest empires of the early Middle Ages. After the Treaty of Verdun in 843, the Carolingian Empire was divided into three kingdoms. West Francia, ruled by Charles the Bald, stretched from the Atlantic to the Meuse and Loire rivers. East Francia, under Louis the German, lay east of the Rhine. And in between, Middle Francia, under Lothair I, ran as a long corridor from the North Sea down to northern Italy, including the lands we now call Alsace and Lorraine. Middle Francia, however, was fragile. After Lothair died in 855, his central lands were split among his sons. The northern part became Lotharingia, roughly the modern regions of Lorraine, Alsace, Luxembourg, and parts of Belgium and the Netherlands. Lotharingia's position, squeezed between West and East Francia, made it a constant point of conflict. As the centuries passed, West Francia gradually became France. Kings expanded control west of the Meuse and Rhine rivers, consolidating cities, towns, and trade routes. East Francia evolved into Germany, forming the core of the Holy Roman Empire, with territories like Bavaria, Saxony, and the Rhineland firmly under Germanic rule. The central lands, especially Alsace and Lorraine, continued to change hands. In the 17th century, during the 30 Years' War, France extended eastward into Alsace, while Lorraine remained contested. The Peace of Westphalia in 1648 confirmed much of these boundaries, giving France legal claims to Alsace, but leaving Lorraine in a limbo between French and German influence. In the 19th century, borders shifted again. After the Franco-Prussian War in 1871, Germany annexed Alsace-Lorraine. But following World War I and the Treaty of Versailles in 1919, it returned to France. During World War II, Germany occupied it once more, only for it to revert to France after 1945. Even today, the modern border between France and Germany reflects this long history. The Rhine River acts as the main natural boundary. West of the Rhine lies France, including Alsace-Lorraine. East of the Rhine lies Germany. The patterns established in 843 at Verdun, the West under one kingdom, the East under another, and a contested central region, echo in the map of Europe over 1,100 years later. The Treaty of Verdun didn't create a permanent border, but it set the framework. Rivers, mountains, and contested lands laid down by Charlemagne's sons became the bones of modern Europe, shaping the long story of France and Germany, their disputes, their alliances, and the lines we still recognize today. If you want to dive deeper into the full history of Europe, we've got something for you. Our book covers every major event in Europe history, from the early dynasties to modern times. It's fully sourced, so every story, every battle, every political decision is backed by primary sources and precise historical references. Whether you're a student, a history lover, or just curious about how Europe past shapes the present, this book gives you a clear, accurate, and detailed narrative you won't find anywhere else. It's available now on our website. The link is right below the video. Grab your copy and explore the history of Europe like never before. Thanks for watching. There's so much more history to explore, so stay tuned for our next videos. We'll dive into even more fascinating stories from Europe and around the world. And of course, subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode.